Coming up at 6 p.m, cracks in the walls, mould, a flooded pharmacy inside London's crumbling hospitals. The new Thames Water boss apologises for letting customers down. And from the capital's biggest to balconies and back gardens, the wonder of wetlands. After the break in London, inside the capital's crumbling hospitals, the ward's in desperate need of rebuilding. Tonight, cracks in the walls, a flooded pharmacy, wards that aren't fit for use. We're given access to St Mary's Hospital in Paddington, where staff are desperate for safe spaces to care for patients.
In the pharmacy, we've had flooding, we've had leaks in various different places.
Also ahead, the new boss of Thames Water apologises for letting customers down.
We are deeply sorry for Thames Water's role in polluting our waterways. This is a really complex problem to solve.
Making their voices heard behind the scenes at the Grenfell play inspired by survivors, and
I'll be finding out some genius ways, such as this, that help our beautiful bugs here in London.
Good evening. It houses London's busiest trauma centre, but the doctors and nurses at St Mary's Hospital are being forced to care for patients surrounded by a building falling to pieces. Literally, walls covered in mould, ceilings collapsing and floors that can't support people and equipment. And no wonder parts of the hospital date back to 1845. St Mary's is far from the only hospital where crumbling buildings threaten care, and the money that could help keeps being delayed, as Cafo Pato reports.
Scaffolding holds up part of the building. The walls are covered in mould. Cracks at every turn, and there are constant leaks infecting the wiring.
St Mary's is an amazing hospital. We deliver really high quality care for our patients and our local community here, but it's falling down.
ITV News was invited into the hospital, and what we witnessed can only be described as a crumbling estate, both outside and in.
But I didn't know. Could you fracture of what? Of his ribs.
This disrepair is putting an enormous strain on those who work here. The staff spend their shifts treating both patients and problems with the building.
So, for example, in the pharmacy, we've had flooding, we've had leaks in various different places. Some of our plasters come down a little bit. We've had our ceiling fall in one of our rooms, again with water damage.
The pharmacy has so far managed to stay open, but the same can't be said for other sections of the hospital. Here, in the infectious disease ward, the space was condemned after being declared structurally unsafe. It's still waiting to be rebuilt.
Hi, how are you? Steve, nice to see you.
In 2019, there was a promise from ministers to rebuild St Mary's and other hospitals facing similar issues by 2030. Now it seems the deadline is in fact the start time.
We're doing it differently, so we're committed to 40 hospitals by 2030. We have brought in, again, listening to what NHS leaders have said to us in terms of a number of hospitals which had a specific issue with the concrete that had been used in their construction, what's known as the rack hospitals. We're fast-tracking those, but it's not just about the record investment that we're making, we're also innovating alongside that.
And we've tried, lots of ways of,
Staff at St Mary's welcomed the government's innovations, but they say they are tired of having to wait, fearing that the longer they do will only lead to more wards closing down.
Well, in a moment we'll get Dr Natalie Rout's take on what we've just seen, but first, Kath is here, and Kath, there are fears that other hospitals are facing similar problems to St Mary's.
Yes, what we saw in St Mary's, it's symptomatic of the problems across the capital. Now in London there are 35 NHS trusts. We've seen figures from 6 of them And those figures, they show that between 2020 and 2022, there were a total of 25 building-related incidents. Incidents such as a maternity ward closing down due to flooding. There was a power incident at Westminster Hospital, and that led to the A&E department shutting down. Now, these are building-related incidents, but at the heart of these issues, it's patients, staff. They're the ones having to bear the costs.
Yeah, Kath, thank you. Straight over to Dr. Natalie then. Any surprises for you in there?
Not at all. I remember during training, which was years ago for me, when GPs spend time in hospitals, there were leaks along corridors. You'd have children being transferred from A&E to their wards and freezing cold because there's no heating. It's a common problem across many hospitals.
Is that ever a consideration for you as a GP when you're referring patients on for care?
Well, you know that patients are already terrified when you suggest that they might need to go into hospital because they don't want to be there. It's not a pleasant environment. Building issues are just one of the many factors that influence how they feel about hospitals. Obviously, the lack of staff is a big problem as well. So if they are cold, they're not going to get a blanket for hours. If they're hungry, they're not going to get food for hours. It's not a nice place for a lot of patients to be.
And as a practitioner, how hard is it to provide care and treatment in surroundings like that? Because a physical environment really does matter to your work, especially when it's life and death.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, it's hard for patients, and you care firstly about how patients are going to cope. But then when you're working in that environment, you're affected by it as well. It can sort of distract you from what you're trying to do. You can't find things. You don't have the space. You don't have the beds. And I think beds are the biggest problem at the moment. If we're seeing wards closing, then that just extends waiting lists even more. And as a GP, that puts more pressure on us in primary care.
The government has promised money in the long term for hospitals, for rebuilding, for repairs. Does that give you any hope?
Unfortunately, like a long-term plan is important to have, but what's happening in the short term? You know, we've got growing levels of people frustrated by the fact that they're not accessing healthcare, they're not able to access it. I see that daily in patients who come to me frustrated that the waiting list has gone from 8 months to now a year long due to staff shortages, building problems, wards closing. All of these things add up. So something needs to happen quickly in order for those waiting lists to not extend.
Yeah, the worries are here and now, aren't they? Dr. Natalie, thank you.
Thank you.
The woman temporarily in charge of Thames Water apologised to customers today for the failings of her debt-ridden company. Carolyn Ross has only been in the hot seat for 1 week, but this morning faced questions from members of the London Assembly. Our senior correspondent Ron K. Phillips spoke to her afterwards.
A congealed mass of wrappers and packaging, trees draped with wet wipes, and even discarded e-bikes, all clogging up the River Lee, one of the capital's few natural rivers. This is the pollution we can see, but what no one knows is how much other waste drifts down the river from the Thames Water plant further upstream. Last week, the company was given a record fine after millions of litres of undiluted sewage was discharged into the rivers near Gatwick Airport in 2017, killing 1,500 fish. The firm's interim boss today admitted there is no excuse.
We are deeply sorry for Thames Water's role in polluting our waterways. This is a really complex problem to solve. We are responsible for part of the pollution in the waterways. We need to stop discharging untreated sewage, and we've got a programme of work that will see us deliver that.
Sarah Bentley, the previous CEO of Thames Water, stepped down last week after being forced to give up her bonus over the company's poor environmental performance. So today it was the interim boss who faced fiery questions at City Hall.
Isn't the fundamental problem here that water having a private monopoly over what should be a public resource is just never going to work?
It won't be me deciding on whether the water businesses get renationalised or not. I mean, that's very much a decision for government.
Thames is the country's biggest water company, serving 15 million customers. It's now secured $750 million of emergency funding from its shareholders, but the debt-ridden company admits it will need further funding in the years ahead, and it's inevitable customers will have to pay more.
Well, it is true that we need to invest a lot in our network. We've got an ageing network that needs investment to bring it back up to scratch, to be in the condition that people would expect. We've also got massive infrastructure and investment needs over decades to cope with things like climate change and population growth. And I'm afraid, yes, ultimately the cost of that is going to fall on the customer bill. But our job at Thames is to make sure that we are delivering that as efficiently as is humanly possible.
The consortium that runs Thames took ownership in 2017 and hasn't taken a dividend since, but the company has paid internal premiums. They say given time, they will clean up the rivers and modernise the entire system. But it's a promise that many see as a drop in the ocean, given their recent record. Ronke Phillips, ITV News.
A 16-year-old boy has died after he was stabbed in Forest Gate. The boy was found injured in West Ham Park on Sunday afternoon and was taken to a hospital but died the next day. A Metropolitan Police officer has been dismissed after exposing himself on Hampstead Heath in March. Detective Constable Darius Alexander was found to have breached the standards of professional behaviour in relation to discreditable conduct. The officer, who was off duty at the time, was arrested by two of his colleagues and found guilty of outraging public decency at Stratford Magistrates Court in June. And Newham Council have voted to not allow London City Airport to extend its flying time on Saturday afternoons after a backlash from residents. The airport wanted to extend its cut-off time for flights from 1 p.m. to 6:30 on Saturdays, but the proposal was unanimously rejected by the council after more than 1,600 residents said the noise already drowned out conversations and made gardens unusable. The man, described as an essential cog in a people smuggling ring that led to the deaths of 39 people in a lorry trailer in Essex, has just been sentenced to 12 years in prison. Men, women and children from Vietnam were all found dead in 2019. Marius Dragici was detained by police in Romania last year for his role before being extradited back to the UK. Anton Allen was in court for us.
Was Marius Dragic a ringleader or simply a driver returning a favour for his human trafficking boss? A favour that ended up contributing to the death of 39 people that were found in a lorry. The judge at the Old Bailey today had to weigh up the role of Marius Dragic as he pleaded guilty a few months ago to the manslaughter of 39 people who were found dead in that lorry trailer in Essex in 2019. Today the court heard phone recordings of desperate pleas for help from the people from Vietnam that were trapped inside that lorry that became an oven during their journey from France to the UK. They perished in heats up to 38 degrees. Mr. Dragic did not drive the lorry, but he would have if he didn't flee the country back to Romania once he found out what had happened to those migrants. They'd all died. They'd paid upwards of £13,000 for what was called a VIP passage to the UK. Now their families are left with that debt. The judge described Mr. Dragic's role as limited but significant. Essex Police issued this statement.
For more than 3 years, we have never lost sight of the impact the events of October 2019 has had, both here in Essex and acutely in Vietnam. Each of the people inside the lorry were mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, brothers and sisters. Their family feel the loss each and every day.
Today, Mr. Dragic has been sentenced to 12 years and 7 months.
Anton Allen there. Next tonight, many of those who survived the Grenfell fire want to keep their stories alive, to make sure the lives lost are honoured and to make sure a fire never kills so many again. As part of that mission, some residents have helped turn the tragedy into a play at the National Theatre. Grenfell, in the words of survivors, is based on the testimony of residents, which, as Rags Martel found, means there is even greater responsibility for the actors and creators telling their stories. Rags was given exclusive access to rehearsals.
The day before the fire, it was kind of a relaxing morning for me.
A play about a tragedy. In the rehearsal rooms of the National Theatre, Grenfell, in the words of survivors. the story of the disaster in 3 acts.
For me as a performer coming into a job like this, just knowing that it's the words of the survivors. So there's a safety in that. I think there's been so much around Grenfell, but it hasn't come directly from the survivors.
If you look at the view from the tower...
The characters are real-life residents. And it's set in the West London Tower before, during and after the fire, where 72 people died.
As if you'd taken a cup and covered it in gold.
In preparation for the roles, the actors got to know survivors.
Yeah, meeting Maher was incredible.
Former Paralympian Gaz Chowdhury plays Maher Kudair, a disabled resident who was stuck on the 9th floor and fell repeatedly down the stairs as he escaped the burning building.
As a person with a disability as well, I'm unfortunately all too aware of these situations. Like Maher made it very clear, like he was one of the lucky ones. There are people in wheelchairs that didn't even have the option to basically make it down the stairs the way he did. It's a shame that it's not surprising, and it's a shame that it's not a situation where I feel like much has changed. So I think it's important for people to hear it in a journey like this.
I live in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea.
The play is by the South African-born writer Gillian Slovo, who started meeting survivors just a few months after the fire.
What made you want to write a play about Grenfell?
Like many people in Britain and actually in the world, I watched that fire with a kind of incredulity and horror. How could this happen in this capital city and in one of the most prosperous boroughs in this capital city? There is a reason why I like to do subjects like Grenfell, because I lived in South Africa during apartheid days. I'm the daughter of 2 prominent anti-apartheid activists. And I learned from a very early age what inequality can do, what a lack of justice can do to a society. And that is why I am interested in covering subjects like Grenfell.
What's it like performing her words?
Well, I mean, I think the brilliant thing about it is it's not her words.
Yeah.
You know, it's the words of the survivors. I feel like what she's been trying to do for such a long time is to amplify their voices and to tell their story.
We said at the time it's going to take a catastrophe here before the council wakes up to what's really going on.
One of the play's characters is Edward Daffan, a resident who warned about a catastrophic fire 6 months before the tragedy.
There have been some criticism that Grenfell shouldn't be made into a play. What's your view?
There are still buildings covered with flammable cladding, as long as there hasn't been a single clink of arrests and handcuffs. As long as people in social housing are still being mistreated, it's really, really important that we have plays like Grenfell to keep Grenfell in the public consciousness.
I would just hope that they'll come and see it and see how careful we have been, really not to impose our thoughts on what it is, but to actually let the people of North Kensington speak.
Grenfell, in the words of survivors, opens tomorrow at the National Theatre. Rags Martel, ITV News.
Now, the last time they met, it was at the coronation, but today it was the Chief Rabbi receiving the honour. Rabbi Mervis was knighted by King Charles at Windsor Castle for services to the Jewish community, education and interfaith relations. That's also of huge importance to the King too, of course. Chief Rabbi Sir Ephraim Mervis joins us now from Hendon, where he's just stepped away from the celebrations, for which we are thankful. Congratulations, and how does it feel to be knighted?
Well, it's lovely. It's a deep privilege for me, and today's event was exceptionally moving.
As a Jew and as a faith leader, were there any differences in the ceremony for you?
Well, it's a traditional ceremony. The King was absolutely wonderful. He made everybody feel exceptionally comfortable. And I was able to engage with him in conversation. He was exceptionally gracious, and I felt a sense of aura there in the presence of His Majesty the King, and it was, of course, a very, very memorable event.
You do have a lot in common with the King, don't you? You both care particularly about how faiths come together in London, something he has been very vocal and passionate about, and which you have a long history of in London.
Yes, absolutely. I got to know Prince Charles, as he was then, very well, always reaching out to members of other faiths and their leaders. And on the very first occasion that I was able to sense this, it was the day when I became Chief Rabbi on the 1st of September 2013. He broke his holiday in order to come and be present. The first time a member of the royal family was at an induction ceremony for a Chief Rabbi, and ever since then we've met often. He genuinely cares about all other people, cares about other faiths, and what we saw in the coronation was an outstanding example of how he wants to include members of other faiths in everything that's happening within the fabric of British society.
Rabbi Mervis, can you take us through the coronation then? Because the palace really did go out of its way. And indeed you and Mrs Mervis went out of your way because, of course, it happened on the Sabbath, which meant there were extra difficulties, shall we say. Can you take us through what they were?
Well, the King and Queen very graciously welcomed my wife and me to King James's palace, where we were their guests over the Jewish Shabbat. And from there, it was easy for me to walk to the Abbey. And then during the ceremony itself, it was a privilege for me to be present. And the palace arranged for a special segment of the event to take place. After the church service was over, I, together with a few other faith leaders, had the privilege of blessing the King. It was historic, the very first time that members of another faith had taken a role within a coronation event.
Rabbi Mervis, I can't let you go without mentioning your recent visit to Lord's, where it seems you felt like England might need a bit of extra help. Let's have a very quick listen.
May the Lord God bless England to win the Ashes.
There you go, offering prayers at Lord's. Have you still got faith in England, Rabbi?
Oh, absolutely, all the way. And the third test was magnificent, as the first two were, and let's hope and pray for a great Ashes victory.
All right, back to the celebrations then. Rabbi Sir Ephraim Mervis, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Next, with fears we could be in for soaring temperatures this summer, the Wetlands Trust is calling on Londoners to do their bit to help wildlife in need of watery spaces. Over to Barnes now. What does that involve, Sally?
Well, it's all about ponds, Duncan. Ponds, ponds, ponds. So good for biodiversity. And even if you have got the tiniest outdoor space, you can build one. Now, here's a posh one. Look at this beautiful drain pipe coming off from the building, collecting rainwater, and it all goes into here, which looks like a normal flower bed, but it's actually a pondy type flower bed. It's got this beautiful water mint, which smells amazing. Look at that stunning water lily. You don't see very many of those in London. And earlier we did a little bit of good old-fashioned pond dipping. And look what we found. So in here, we've got about 7 or 8 species we spotted. Come and have a look, and you can see some of them. There's little leeches and bugs and larvae and all sorts going on. Probably a bit unclear. Some of them are doing some slightly strange things, but obviously they're very good for the whole biodiversity of London and wherever we are. Now, Tom, you're from the Wetland Centre here in London. What is the problem with ponds and this city?
Well, in the UK in general, we've lost half of our ponds in the 20th century, and London is even worse for that with the built-up areas. So what we're asking people to do is really bring back some of that wetland wildlife and bringing with it that amazing biodiversity. These are some of the most biodiverse spaces in the world. And you get stuff like, you get your bugs, as we've seen there, you get dragonflies, birds.
Okay, now you might think they're difficult to build, but you've been showing me today that they are. We've got this homemade one here. What do you think about this? Talk us through this, Tom.
Yeah, so simple this. Literally a bucket, and you can put this in the ground. We've got some soil in there, we've got some pebbles, we've got some rocks, and on top of that, we've got these wetland plants, some reed mace, some bulrush.
Yeah.
And that is just going to suck in all those bugs, and with it, the birds, possibly bats, frogs, newts, all of that wonderful stuff.
Oh, wow, who'd have thought? My goodness. I have to say, there's some amazing videos on the Wetlands and Wildfowl Trust website. Do go on there. I saw someone make one in a builder's helmet, a tiny little pond, so you can do some incredible things. Tom, it's also related, isn't it, to climate change?
Yeah, so both as we get more climate change, it's going to get hotter, drier, but also in some periods wetter. And what wetlands do is they hold water. So in those dry periods, you get that wetland haven for wildlife. But also in those wetter periods, holds water in the land and stops it going into our roads, into our streets and causing those issues. So key for climate resilience.
All right, well listen Tom, thank you so much. So if you have always dreamed of having a pond like I have, you too can have one. Just get something like this. Oh, I shouldn't bang it, there's beautiful wildlife in there, but you know what I mean. Anyway, let's take a little look at the weather. Should be all right tonight, looking rather nice.
ITV London weekday weather is sponsored by Octopus Electric Vehicles. Car, charger and energy.
Hello again. Well, gorgeous to see this beautiful butterfly. I don't know if it's just me, but I've not seen very many this year. Now, into the weather for tomorrow, a brighter start. There'll still be some showers around, possibly a few more than today. As we head into Thursday, it's the other way around, some sunshine and probably fewer showers. Let's take a little look at the pressure chart. So we've got a slight ridge of high pressure into Thursday, which will probably bring us those slightly drier conditions. But into Friday and Saturday, you can see that low pressure taking hold again, bringing in some wet conditions, probably slightly later in the day, but there's a lot of detail to pin down, so worth keeping an eye on the forecast. As for this evening, well, we should see quite a lot of this cloud and any showers you might have drift off, disappear out of the way to give us some clear skies overnight. A slightly different feeling from last night, a bit fresher, a bit less stuffy, and you can see those temperatures a bit lower than last night, but still just about into the teens. And then as we start tomorrow morning, some nice sunshine around and blue sky initially, and then as the day goes on, that cloud bubbling up and a few showers reappearing once again. Some of them might be a bit heavy, there might even be the odd isolated thunderstorm, and quite gusty as they come through, but there are drier conditions in between. As you can see, some sunshine cropping up from time to time, and in that sunshine, feeling a bit like today, highs of 22 or 23 degrees. Into the evening, the early part, there'll still be a few showers here or there, but eventually as the evening progresses, they do head off out of the way. Now Thursday's looking generally a bit dry. I couldn't rule out a shower here or there, and then into Friday and Saturday, that's when things become much more unsettled. But for now, from us all here at the beautiful Wetland Centre, we'll see you later on. Cheerio!
ITV London weekday weather is sponsored by Octopus Electric Vehicles.
Thank you, Sally. Just before we go, the Daily Mirror Pride of Britain Awards take place later this year, and we're looking for your help to find a fantastic fundraiser to represent ITV London at the ceremony. It's one of the biggest events in the showbiz calendar, but it's the real people, not the celebrities, who are the stars of the show. If you know someone who fits the bill, you can nominate them on our website, which is itv.com/Pride of Britain.
The Pride of Britain Awards are all about the special people who make our world a better place to live in. And the ITV Regional Fundraiser Awards is where you come in, because we're looking for those people who go that extra mile to raise money.
You can only nominate individuals, and they must be aged 18 years old or over. If you're under the age of 18 and want to nominate someone over 18, please get permission from a parent or guardian. The full terms and conditions and our privacy notice can be found on our website. Right, that is it. The evening news is next with Charlene, but for now, from all of us on the London team, have a lovely evening. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.